new wireless headphones on. And today's first special guest of the day, John, go ahead and introduce him.
We have a guy that works for AAC Daily, and just found out the other day he might be covering a lot more college football in general and all over the NCAA football action. Austin Cox joins us. Austin, appreciate you joining us on this Sunday, and thank you for your time.
Hey guys, my pleasure, and happy New Year to you both.
Thank you very
Appreciate it,
much,
man.
man.
Happy
Thank you
New
very
Year
much.
as
So,
well.
Austin, quick first question for you, Austin. What is it like to cover the American? Of course, John and I are big Memphis Tiger fans, but in my opinion, I think the American is a very strong conference, not just football, but all around. What's it like to cover the American Athletic Conference?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's just like really, I'd say it's a lot like covering any of the other power conferences. It's nothing like covering Conference USA, which I was lucky enough to do for one season when I was younger, or covering a Sun Belt or something. The American carries itself like a power conference, and by that I mean when you show up to games, the materials are there in the press boxes, which sounds sounds kind of simple, but it's a lot. I would say the American is a lot more like power conferences than it gets credit for, and I've been lucky to cover it day in and day out, and get to know these great athletic departments that really don't get enough coverage on the national stage.
Really agree. Go ahead, John.
Austin, you just have covered football. You covered a little bit of basketball as well, don't you?
Yeah, I've been lucky to cover basketball for the American. I haven't really dug into things this season because of the way this season's gone just across every sport, but we've seen it get really bad here in basketball with that stop and go, stall, and try and restart situation. So I haven't got to follow the sport as much this season as I have in the past when I was doing it regularly for the AAC Daily. But of course, I've been able to see the tight races as always with all the teams around the league. You got Houston sitting there, a top 5 team. Of course, they took that loss to Tulsa. This is one of those leagues that you can maybe skip a couple days, miss a couple games, no matter what. It's always going to be a tight race up there at the top.
Okay, the reason I was asking, I'm going to start with the reason I was asking, I was going to start with football on you. Who was your pretty much surprise team, and kind of like your little bit of a disappointment that you kind of thought that was a little bit better this year going into the American?
Well, I'll tell you what, my biggest surprise was Tulsa. And I know a lot of people will say that they were on the radar. The Golden Hurricane should have been getting a lot more respect, I should say, because got a great run game. They had Zach Smith there at quarterback, transfer from Baylor. And for lack of a better term, Philip Montgomery was due in a lot of people's minds because he's been putting a lot of work in there for 4 or 5 years. And a lot of people haven't seen that kind of success that they were expecting from him. So some people were expecting it. I wasn't. I think they were a big surprise to me, starting with that, UCF win. They did it last year. They did it again this year. And then we saw one upset after another. I think they were also my biggest disappointment, though. Their bowl game against Mississippi State was a bit of a heartbreaker, really.
Yeah, that Tulsa Mississippi State game was a great game, but then the way that game ended was just like John, like we talked about last night on our show, Austin, or Aaron, I'm sorry, was just an absolute black eye college football.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was. It really
on
was.
Both teams.
Yeah, and especially for both teams, we saw it. And you guys, I think, have the fan base there in Memphis has a much better idea of it because you guys experienced it firsthand with BYU. And BYU fans won't admit it, but if you watch how that game ended, of course, talk about that Miami Beach Bowl. If you look at how that ended, who started it. It was not the Memphis Tigers, but
Right.
You see both of those fan bases, they walked away with different views of how it started and how it ended. When you look at the Tulsa Mississippi State game, you know, it was a very similar situation. No excuse for it. And I feel bad for Tulsa because I feel like they're getting some credit for a fight that I really don't believe was their fault. I think that the Mississippi State Bulldogs were a little bit chippier, but of course, I might
Oh,
have a
yeah.
little bit of bias.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, that entire game from pregame leading up to that debacle at the end of the game, and we talked about it yesterday. Let me get your opinion on this. Kirk Herbstreit mentioned on game day that officials who are now in the field, I believe it's 60 minutes before kickoff. He has proposed
Yeah,
expanding
it
that out to
was,
90
but then it was 90 minutes.
minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's now 90 minutes.
Right.
What is your stand on when the officials should be on the field pregame? And what is your stand on how we can make sure this doesn't happen in the future?
Well, I think what you got to do is you got to take your officiating crews and split them into essentially they're already broken down into teams on their own, but you got to assign those guys. I think pre and post game, which it gets trickier because these are guys that are trying to make sure that they're ready for the game themselves. They got a hard job ahead of them, but I do believe that you have to have at least some members of your crew out there at all times, anytime that there's players from either team out there on the field. I think you got to have a crew out there just to see what might be transpiring before a game because we've seen it. Things can impact that game that happen out there on the field, things that are said. I do believe there should be somebody from the officiating crew out there whenever there's players in advance of the game.
I brought the biggest surprise and biggest disappointment up, but I was kind of, surprised how UCF kind of not given. I'm kind of surprised Jeff Heupel, the way that he kind of didn't really change things up on really offense at all this year. I know
Yeah.
Dylan Gabriel did his thing on offense, but it looked like I was watching the same stuff when I watched them up close and personal when they played Memphis, doing the same stuff over and over and over again. Awesome.
Yeah, I think a lot of people got that vibe, and I think it really showed through by the results. You're looking at a 6-4 team, 6-3 team in the regular season, playing in the American Athletic Conference. I think a lot of people looked at them early on and thought, they're not really bringing anything new to the table, which I think might be the most surprising thing, really, when you look at UCF, because Josh Heupel was brought in because of what he was able to do with the Missouri Tigers offense, which prior to his arrival there in Columbia, Missouri, was just a very bad SEC.
Abysmal. It was terrible.
It
Yeah.
was. And, you got to give Heupel credit for that. But you looked at that and thought, well, this guy, based on what he did at Oklahoma, of course, he was brought on there because of his time playing for Bob Stoops, but what he did at Oklahoma briefly, what he did at Missouri, people expected a transformation to see something different, not necessarily, groundbreaking, but something different. And they really didn't bring anything different this year, and it showed through.
Yeah, it really did. And I mean, I've talked about it numerous times on this show. I'm just not a big Josh Heupel fan. I just don't feel like he makes the proper adjustments in game to be a high paid, high caliber coach. That's just my opinion. I could be completely wrong on that. When you look at the American Athletic Conference this season, of course, the big team is Cincinnati. They ran the table. They won the conference in football. They were very, very deserving to go to the New Year's Six Bowl. And I think based on how they played against Georgia, do you see a team like Cincinnati, a team like Memphis, possibly making a jump to the Power Five conference, or do you think that's just something that we dream of that will never happen?
It's very possible. We saw just in 2016, which of course I think was the time when people in Memphis might have first heard my name ever was during the Big 12 expansion then. And, looking at that, the teams, or excuse me, the conferences, they're going to be hungry. They're going to have slots to fill. And the Big 12, if this trend continues, and the trend I'm talking about is the separation of autonomy conferences and non-autonomy, if that separation continues, the Big 12 is not going to want to sit there with 10 teams. And it's not going to poach the Pac-12, which you'll hear from some people. I want to say people around the Big 12. You only hear it from fans around the Big 12. The Big 12 can't poach the Pac-12. It's really an untouchable conference because of its positioning, because of its history with the Big Ten and the Rose Bowl. It's not going to touch the ACC because of its grant of rights. To even suggest the SEC is laughable. The Big Ten, same situation. So when the Big 12 does expand, it's going to be looking at the American Athletic Conference. It's not going to be looking at the Mountain West Conference because, as we've seen there, those teams, their value is plummeting. Each and every season since 2014, the value of the Mountain West Conference, its TV contract, its teams, its ratings have fallen. And that's because they're not producing an NY6 program. They're not getting that exposure and people aren't watching. So the Big 12 is not going to look over there. They're not going to take Air Force. BYU doesn't play on Sundays. When it happens, it will be an AAC school. And I say it will be a school. It will be multiple.
You were talking about the Mountain West a second ago, but there's talks now that Boise State could be joining the American as soon as maybe this year coming up. Do you know anything on what's the latest on that, maybe, or any teams other than Boise maybe leaving the Mountain West? Because I've been listening to some reports out there saying maybe Air Force might leave the Mountain West to join the American. I've seen San Diego State mentioned. But it is probably just for football only, correct?
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely football only. And I'll give you a mixture of what Michael Resco has told me every time I talk to him, which is always the same, almost written out response of the league's not going to comment on this stuff. They're not going to talk about who's possibly interested or not. They're not going to talk about expansion directly. Now, thankfully, even Mike hasn't been able to duck it too much with Boise State because of all the leaks coming out, because of the emails. And we know that from the head coaches to the athletic directors to the school president, Boise State wants into the AAC. And it's gotten to a point where the American feels comfortable enough that it doesn't even have to rush. It's saying, well, we'll sit back and wait. We'll play it by ear. We'll only take you for football because you're not going to have ECU flying out to Boise State for a baseball. Well, I guess Boise State doesn't even have baseball anymore, but you're not going to, logistically, it wouldn't make sense to send any of these schools, to send an SMU or a Tulsa, a school with a smaller budget out there. So it's got to be football only. And I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that multiple schools, including San Diego State, including Air Force, have talked to the American.
Awesome. And like I said, as a Memphis fan, I would love to go out to the Smurf Surf and take on Boise State. I think that would be a great road trip. And I think Tiger fans, speaking as a Tiger fan, I think Tiger fans would be excited about making that trip. And I think Boise State would add a lot to the conference on the football level. It does bring the level of competition up. I understand they just lost their head coach to Auburn, but still, Boise State is I feel like a solid football program. At least they have been as of late, going back to that game against Oklahoma. But do you cover, as far as basketball, I just want to touch on it for a second. Of course, Penny Hardaway being at Memphis, we've seen how well he can recruit. We, as Memphis fans, probably haven't seen the wins that they would like to see. I know recently we changed our offense up. It's a little more motion activated, things of that nature, a little more low post presence. When you look at the basketball conference of the American with the conference tournament coming up in March, who do you see as a sleeper team to possibly win the conference?
As a sleeper team, I would have to say, and this is going to sound a little bit crazy to some people because right now they're sitting there at 2-0 in the league, and I think they're 6-2, 6-3 overall. The Wichita State Shockers, and that's just because when you lose your head coach, I don't care what the situation is. Of course, with Greg Marshall, there was a lot more to it, a lot to the background. It was more of a, yes, it's about the right sound. It was more of a soap opera behind the scenes. But when you look at a team and they lose that structure, that anchor or captain of the ship right before the season starts, for them to be sitting where they are right now, I think is pretty impressive. They would be my dark horse, my absolute. I don't see anything. I would be absolutely stunned if they won the conference. Would have to be. I'd say, you know what, for a team that would have a chance, it would stun me. Tulane. I would say what Ron Hunter's doing there. That would be they might be able to win it, but it would shock the heck out of me team.
I still think, Tulsa's got some good wins as of late, regarding some basketball games. But what's going on in Cincinnati regarding basketball right now? They're like 2-6. I know they lost to Tulsa at home the other night.
Yeah.
The coach is, I don't know, I forgot how many years he's been there, but he came from somewhere in northern Kentucky, I believe. But I'm like, this ain't the same when Nick Cronin and Bob Huggins was coaching. I'm not used to that now. Yeah, I'm not used to them being 2-6 overall. I thought they would actually be maybe in the top 4 right now in the conference. But they would have been struggling on offense and then a little bit struggling on defense. And they missed good old Jerry Cumberland, I guess, too. But I'm kind of surprised about Cincinnati as well, Austin.
Well, yeah, you mentioned some of those names like Cumberland. You're missing a lot of those weapons, but you touched on John Brandon. Yeah, he's in year 2 now, his second full season there at the helm of the Cincinnati Bearcats, and he came over from Northern Kentucky, which, if your listeners aren't that familiar with them, I think the Tigers actually scheduled them as a non-conference not too long ago, but they just jumped to D1, I want to say 7 years ago. We're in the Atlantic Sun, jumped over to the Horizon League when Valparaiso moved over to the Missouri Valley. They're a small program, but they've had some pretty good success. I think they went to 2 trips to the NCAA tournament under Brannon. What he's going to have to do at Cincinnati, though, is going to be a complete rebuild, and not just he's got to get players in there. He's got to change the culture to meet his style. He grew up in the tri-state area, that Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, there on the river area, but he's not like Mick Cronin, as you mentioned. He's not like a Bob Huggins. He doesn't have those guys go down there with the physicality that those guys did, that Memphis fans are familiar with, especially in the Bob Huggins days, where those were some physical Cincinnati teams. I don't expect to see those from John Brannon, but the UC fans hope they will, but I just don't see that being his style. I think it's going to be a much faster, up-tempo kind of team, but whatever is going on right now, it's not working sitting there at 2-6.
Yeah, that's very surprising, especially like John said, coming from Cincinnati. Very almost as surprising as Kentucky this year. They're just really struggling, which it doesn't bother me to see. But when you look at the American Athletic Conference, speaking of Mike Oresco, I listened to Rick Neuheisel's XM radio show a lot, and Oresco's been on there quite a bit. I really like him as the head of the American Athletic Conference. Do you see him sticking around for quite some time?
I do, because we've seen a lot of, I would say, commissioner moves in the last couple of years that are not that common. We've seen like Jim Delaney leaving the Big Ten with Kevin Warren stepping in. The ACC just got their new commissioner. It's not that common. We're just seeing a lot of turnover at the moment. With Oresco, I really wish he would have shown up about 3 years earlier. I think the Big East probably would have had a much better TV contract than the one it had to end up taking before it became the American. But as far as his leadership, he's been an extremely subdued kind of leader. And by that, I mean, I'd say the previous 3 years up until maybe last fall, he was doing a lot of work behind the scenes. And of course, he was doing the TV contract. And with his experience as a former VP at CBS Sports. He had to, of course, be a lot more hands-on with that. So maybe that's why we didn't see him as much. But in this past, I'd say, season and a half, he's became a lot more vocal. And as he told me, he said, it's because he wanted to give it a chance. He didn't want to freak out at first and say that the system was broken. So he wanted to give it time. But as he's observed it, he's become more vocal. And I think that really benefits the league and all the members, including Memphis.
I completely agree. And this year with Cincinnati and just the way they were ranked and how just lopsided it was, to be honest. I'm glad that he spoke out and spoke up for not only Cincinnati this year, but he also spoke very highly of Memphis last year. Like I said, if you look at the American Athletics Conference in New Year's Six Bowls, we're 3-3, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah. It's just,
I mean, that's to me, that's yeah. I mean, of course, Memphis was the only team to win a conference game this year, or I'm sorry, a bowl game this year for the American. In what I thought was a good performance against Florida Atlantic. I don't think Florida Atlantic's all that great. Very undisciplined team. When you look at the American Athletic Conference on the basketball side, as far as NCAA tournament is concerned, how many teams do you see possibly getting into the field of 64?
With this year, it's you gotta, on an optimistic side, and it's probably not that optimistic for your guys' listeners, but I would say probably you're looking at 3 teams this year because for whatever reason, the league has not been getting a lot of respect. You see, SMU's out there. I think SMU's pulling its weight. They're sitting there undefeated, but not getting a lot of respect. We talked about Wichita State, the work that they're doing without their head coach, and of course, several transfers. And Tulsa knocking off Houston just this past week. And Memphis, a team that, Penny really, he confuses me, is the best way I can say it with some of these teams because they'll come out there.
Everybody in Memphis.
You see games and you're like, all right, they're about to turn the corner and we're about to see them light some stuff up. And then a completely different team comes out the next game and you go, why did I get my hopes up? What's going on here? But, if I would say on the good side, we're probably looking at a good chance of 3 teams in the NCAA tournament because I think it's going to be a really crowded field and a really hard year with all these cancellations that are inevitable. It's going to be hard for these committees to make choices.
Austin, I don't know if you follow any women's basketball at all, but a lot of people in Memphis right now are not really happy with Melissa, especially this year, starting off so rocky, being 2-6, I believe now, after yesterday's loss to Tulane 80-44. But everybody talked about this year being, the year that she should make some noise, especially without UConn in the tournament or in the conference, and then South Florida. South Florida still got a decent women's basketball team as well. But with the recruiting class that Melissa put together this year, with some, and then last year as well, everybody's kind of like, okay, where's the improvement this year with women's basketball? But, I'm not saying Melissa, is going to get fired after this year because, Larry Beach is a new AD and it's a COVID year, but something's got to be going on. She hasn't made the tournament at all, and it's been 11 years, it feels like.
Yikes. I'll tell you what, that is a rough patch. I mean, if you go 11 years without an appearance, I think, I don't want to be the person here to sign a death warrant or anything, but I would say that the fans certainly deserve to be frustrated, especially as you mentioned with UConn being out of the conference now. A lot of people viewed this as a year where, hey, we're going to get some some fresh eyes. We're going to get some better looks at some of these other teams as they get an opportunity to shine. And you mentioned USF. I mean, the job Jose Fernandez has done making I always have a hard time calling them the Lady Bulls, but turning South Florida into the program that he has been a great job. But it's really hard. And I'll say this in Melissa's defense, Women's basketball coaching, I would say, is probably more competitive than any other level or any other type of sport because you only got maybe 15 really good teams, 15 teams that are going to ever have a chance at winning a title in the tournament once March rolls around for women's basketball. And that drop off from 15 to 16 is massive. But I don't want to. I also don't want to. I don't want to sign her death warrant. I don't want to defend her too much either. But I got to say, it's especially tough in a year like this, and with a new AD. She might just get that extra year of eligibility, so to speak.
But yeah, I'm just surprised by the outcome right now as of, being 2-6. And especially like this year, with all the talent that she has brought in for recruiting, I'm just surprised by the outcome of this year's basketball team. I know the offense is struggling, but I'm more surprised at the defense, giving up a lot of points, here and there. But, like you said, it could, like Larry Beach is a new AD. It's the first year under him. It's a COVID year. She might get it past this year. But the people that, I'm used to basically a Kevin McMillan out there at UT Martin that could come in and recruit a little bit better and then make the tournament because he's made the tournament at UT Martin when Jasmine Newsom and all of them made the tournament, But talk about Ryan Silverfield under his first season at the University football program.
Well, I'll tell you what, he's my favorite coach right now in the American Athletic Conference because, as we mentioned, he's the only one that managed to record a bowl win this season. And, if the league went 0-6, it would have really stung, I think, a lot worse. But thankfully, Memphis recording that win over FAU, that I think is a respectable team, probably gets more credit than it deserves. But a win is a win, especially a 15-point one in a bowl game. As far as Ryan Silverfield goes, it's one of those things. Whenever you transition, the fans start out the season with some excitement, and if you see 1, 2, or in the case of Memphis, 3 losses, it can kill some of your momentum. But it should not, because looking at that team, I didn't see that many hiccups. I didn't see that many miscues or misfires compared to what you usually see when you see a head coach as impactful as Mike Norvell move on. When you see somebody like that, like, for example, and I'm not trying to equate Memphis or Western Michigan, but when you see somebody like PJ Fleck leave Western Michigan, the program falls apart. They think they might make a good hire, but, even leaving some personnel behind doesn't transition that well. Something about Ryan Silverfield, and this showed the moment that he was hired. In fact, it showed before he was hired when the players began petitioning for him. He has a connection with that team that just is something special. And I think it showed the entire season. In the post games, he seems connected with those guys. He's not one of those coaches that you'll ever see throw the team under the bus. And I'm not going to throw out any coach's name, but we've all seen the post games where a loss happens and suddenly that coach is he's putting the finger at every single player instead of looking in the mirror for a second. Ryan Silverfield seems like a stand-up guy who, based on this year, and again, it's a small sample size. It's been a weird year, as you said, a COVID year. But looking at him, I'd have to give him at least, at minimum, a B+ on this year.
Yeah, I think when you look at Ryan Silverfield, and what really impressed me was multiple times this season, there were some pressure cooker situations he was in, and they would show him on the sideline, and he was just cool, calm, collected. We're gonna get through this. I never really saw him not necessarily lose his cool, but lose his composure and get too into a situation and not make the correct play call or whatever. Now, there were some times that John and I both questioned the play calling this year from Kevin Johns. But all that being said, if you look at Ryan Silverfield in his first year, do what, John?
And McIntyre at times, but the defense got better throughout the year.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at just go back to the bowl game alone. If you look at that performance that the defense put together against Florida Atlantic, That was very impressed. And I think going into next season, you've got to be excited if you're a Memphis Tiger football fan for just how we performed in the bowl game, moving on, closing out 2020, moving into 2021. And I completely agree. Ryan Silverfield did an amazing job this year. First head coach to ever win a bowl game, I believe, in his first season. I'm really curious to know, what is he like to just interact with? He seems like just a very down to earth type of guy.
It's funny because whenever you're dealing with these guys, any coaches, you get one of two things. You get abrasive, frustrated coach who just doesn't want to talk because, who does in some of these situations after your adrenaline's been pumping for 3.5 hours, and then also you get the coaches who are I call it being handheld, where you got your comms guy, somebody from one of your SIDs from your communications department, who basically tells the coach who they're about to talk to. So a coach that I've never talked to in my entire life will come say, hey, Austin, I'm so glad you're here. I'm like, yeah, you never met me, man. Ryan Silverfield has never once, he's never given me a disingenuous feel. It's weird to try to put it into words, but he's not the kind of coach that you ever get around and you think whatever's coming out of his mouth is just whatever. He's not saying what people want to hear. I think he's a genuine guy.
Right. Yeah.
Before COVID,
after that one game, I can't remember which one it was now. We got our butt kicked. And Ryan Silverfield came out and was like, hey, we just got our ass kicked. That's what happened. I mean, yeah, I think it was Cincinnati. And I mean, that really excited me as a fan because he's honest. I mean, very similar to the way Sam Pittman's doing it at Arkansas. He's honest with his fans. He's honest with his team. And that goes a long way, I think. Go ahead, John.
Also, before COVID got crazy and everything like that, what road trips did you actually get to go on to cover the AAC for the football?
Oh, man. Let's see. My basic every opportunity I got for Dallas, I would take to Dallas and Houston, just because I lived in DFW for a couple of years. And when I first started covering the AAC, I was living in Dallas, so I would take every Cincinnati opportunity I could get. The most special one, I would say, would have been, or it was, Navy's Navy Marine Corps Memorial Stadium, which has the I know you have several listeners down there in Memphis who are Navy veterans that follow me. So if you guys are listening, I'm not making fun of Navy's press box, but it is the worst press box that I've ever been in. It's
wow.
I think it was built in like the 60s, and they just really haven't updated the press box. But the stadium itself is a place where, if you get the opportunity, gentlemen, I highly recommend this. Get there early in the morning if you ever get to cover a game, and walk around that stadium just by yourself and look at the names that are on the walls, the awards, the history. That's probably the best stadium in the American that I've gotten to sit down and just experience. Ironically, with the worst press box.
You did get to come to Memphis, didn't you, that one year?
I went to Memphis for the first time I ever covered Memphis. Was Black Friday, the Houston game, where I was down there in the tunnel with Tom Herman when he was saying, no, I never talked to Texas. I haven't been talking to anybody. And that was right before the game. And then, of course, everybody knows the history after that. He went to Texas. But, yeah, that was I had a ball down there. Black Friday, let me tell you, I arrived there on Thanksgiving, and nothing was open. That was the only negative I can say about Memphis.
Yeah, you didn't get to have any Rendezvous barbecue or Central barbecue or anything like that, did you?
You know what? I don't know what they had in the press box, but I will say this:
it's probably Rendezvous.
That is the best press box food in the American Athletic Conference. They had donuts from a place called Gibson's, and oh man, there was this. Yep. I don't eat a lot of sweets, but I used to, but I don't anymore. I had this maple bacon. It was like there was pecans or something. I still remember it, gentlemen. That's how good the donuts were in the press box at Memphis.
Well, next time you come to Memphis, Rendezvous and barbecues on the list.
Will do.
Austin, real quick, these are my last two questions for you, or three questions. My first one is, regarding Tom Herman. You just brought Tom Herman up, but are you surprised the way that Texas handled that situation by firing the guy and then hiring another guy? And then I know there's probably a lot of things behind the scenes, but last month the president and AD came out with a statement and said, "Oh, Tom Herman's our guy going forward," you know, or at least for next year at least. But are you surprised the way that Texas handled this?
I'm surprised, just like everybody else, but at the same time, Texas is another world. Texas and the Texas Longhorns operate in a whole another universe than compared to Cincinnati or Memphis or even to your Illinois or some of your regular Big Ten schools. Texas operates in a world where they can drop. I believe it came in somewhere in the field of 25 million just to fire Herman. You have 15 million in guaranteed for Herman, 10 million guaranteed for his assistants. Then you got to hire Steve Sarkisian. You got to handle his assistants' coaching salaries, moving. That we're talking upwards of $40 million for a single coaching change. And that's just something, especially in an environment like this. We keep mentioning COVID. We live in a world right now where schools are cutting athletics left and right just so that they can maintain the athletics like, football or men's basketball that bring in some revenue. And we've got Texas out here dropping $40 million like it's nothing for a coaching change. It's a crazy world when it comes to some of these schools.
Especially with how many layoffs Texas actually did in their athletic department this year. In general, regarding layoffs and furloughs and, in general. I'm just surprised that Texas actually pulled the trigger, yesterday. That's why I'm bringing Tom Herman up. Who is your Heisman Trophy winner, if you don't mind me asking?
You know what? I would have said Lawrence, honestly, just on default. But I guess I'm torn right now because I can't say Justin Fields, regardless of his performance yesterday, day before. I can't say him because I'm a stickler for fairness. I believe that Ohio State did not play enough games to be one in the championship game, or two, have its players in contention for these other awards where others had to play sometimes well over double the amount of games. It's tough to call. I mean, you know what? I would just say Dylan Gabriel. If I get to say anybody, I'm just say an AAC. Or no, you know what? I'll say Brady White. I'll go ahead and say the record holder for Memphis now.
Well, the finalists, with the Heisman Trophy winner, the quarterback from Alabama, the receiver from Alabama, and then Trevor Lawrence, and then Kyle Trask. But those are your final four. But out of those four, who do you got?
The Trask. Maybe an oddball. How about you guys?
I got Smith, the wide receiver from Alabama, number one. I got Alabama quarterback number two, and I got Trevor Lawrence number three, and Kyle Trask going forward, just because I know Florida had all those players optioned out. But I know a lot of people are going to be saying, well, the Cotton Bowl appearance was the biggest disappointment in Kyle Trask. But, that's the reason I probably got him fourth, just because that's what they're going to be looking at, how all these players optioned out on Kyle Trask at the last week, at the last minute.
Well, and then you also get the excuse, and you gentlemen can never forget this. He plays for an SEC team, and it wasn't the national championship, so they did not want to be there. So you can't hold that against Kyle.
Right. That's true. I think if you look, I think you got to give it to Devontae Smith. Like I said on the show yesterday, and I've said before, with the wide receiver position, as you're very familiar with, there's multiple variables of whether he even gets the ball thrown to him. So for Devontae to do what he's done this season in that offense and just how powerful it is, yes, you got to give the guy throwing the ball to him as much credit as him in Mac Jones. But Devontae Smith, I think, is the better of the country. I would put his quarterback, Matt Jones, third. I would do Trevor Lawrence. I'm sorry, Mac Jones second, Trevor Lawrence third, and then Kyle Trask fourth. But I think that Kyle Trask and Trevor Lawrence are almost interchangeable on that list, um, because you can't take anything from Kyle Trask. The guy had a absolute amazing season in Florida, and that was with guys getting injured throughout the season as well.
It's been a crazy year. I think, like as we've mentioned, repeatedly on today's program, is that it's COVID. It's been a COVID year. It's been a weird one. And you know what? I'm not gonna lie. I think you might have swayed me here a little bit, just because for a wide receiver to even get the stats to be in consideration, you might have swayed me towards Smith, because, and the reason I'm going to put Smith ahead of Jones now is because I believe Smith was a big enough target that it gave Jones something to throw to. We don't really see that very often at Alabama, to be honest.
Yeah,
Right.
especially
We don't. That's very good point.
Waddle getting
Mhm.
yeah, especially with Waddle getting hurt in the Tennessee game, but
You know,
it stepped up big for Smith this year in general. But the third question I have for you is, like, with all these coaching new hires, like for example, Terry Bowden went to Louisiana Monroe, and Brian Hartsoll left for Auburn. Like, who's your biggest coaching change out there that could basically maybe make the biggest impact on their new team next year? Like, for example, I don't want to throw Will Clark out there because he turned down the interview at from UAB to go to Auburn. But
yeah.
I do see Will Clark and Seth Luttrell at North Texas. I know North Texas had a down year in general, but I do see those two coaches in the Conference USA, in the near future, maybe taking a bigger jump. Like Graham Harrell did at Southern Cal now, being their offense coordinator that led North Texas. But who do you see their biggest coaching change that happened this year up to date right now that could make a big impact going into next season?
Surprisingly, I've got to go with Harsin for the biggest impact that has happened this season that will impact next year, because, you're not just talking about the impact it's going to have on Auburn, but the residual effects that it's going to have radiating through all of college football, because we saw that fall off at Boise State when Chris Peterson went to Washington, and of course they had that handoff to Harsin, who had the experience there as an OC. But I do believe now, with him going to Auburn, you're going to see a vacuum of sorts there in the Mountain West. So I think that's the biggest impact overall. I do not, however, see Harsin doing that much at at Auburn. I don't see him having the kind of success that Peterson's had at Washington, for example. But it does remind me, of course, like we were just talking about Texas, how Auburn's able to make these huge multi-million-dollar, tens of millions-dollar buyouts and hire new coaches here in the middle of this COVID 2020 situation, while some of these other schools have to do so much more with so much less. It's a crazy situation to think about.
Do you see Blake Anderson succeeding at Utah State? I see,
Yeah.
as a Memphis fan, with Memphis to Jonesboro being so close, I do see some Arkansas State, games here and there because, I cover high school football here locally and they recruited pretty well. I see Blake Anderson. Me personally, I think he can make some interesting stuff going on in Utah State. I really do.
Oh, absolutely. He's got the kind of personality too that I think he can succeed wherever he's at, and I think he's been smart because he's had those opportunities, much like Seth Luttrell a couple of years ago, where he was one of the hottest names in football before he decided to stay in North Texas. Which, I don't know if that was the best choice. Now people will ask, was it Graham Harrell there as the OC that might have been giving Seth Luttrell that success? But looking at Blake Anderson, I think he was smart to wait. He had a lot of opportunities. He could have taken one of those quote unquote P5 jobs where you get that paycheck for a year or two, but then the pressure starts to heat up at a school that can't win to begin with. Going to a Utah State where somebody like Matt Wells, who's now at Texas Tech, had a great amount of success at Utah State. I think it could be a really good fit. I just don't know if it's the kind of place that a coach can make waves at, especially and I'm not trying to run down the Mountain West, but as its exposure diminishes, it's going to be harder for coaches to make big waves out of that league.
Yeah, especially the way I know San Jose
Completely agree.
State got their
Um,
yeah, San Jose. Go ahead, Wes. I'm sorry. I was gonna
Oh,
say
there you
San
go.
Jose State. I was gonna
My
say San
question
Jose
was,
State letting go their OC. It's kind of surprising with
yeah,
San Jose State
yeah,
the way they
that's
showed up in
a
the
big
bowl game.
change too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the San Jose State is one of
Oh
those.
yeah,
I was shifting over to CFP now, which is going to be the new program for 2021, and I've been watching more of these other programs, of course. And when you saw San Jose State and saw that record, even though it's the Mountain West, there's that part of me that says, "Hey, the American deserves respect. If they win the games they play, show them some respect." So, of course, I was parroting that and saying the exact same thing for San Jose State. And, I don't know who showed up for that Ball State game, but the Cardinals did. The Spartans did not. And it really hurt the image of the Mountain West.
yeah, completely agree. When you look at the head coaches, obviously we've seen some dominoes fall already. Uh, do you have any idea of a domino that might fall that we're not seeing right now or we're not thinking about?
I have to imagine there's going to be quite a few. We look at, just last year, the biggest surprise, I think, for all of us was Mark D'Antonio, I believe the day after National Signing Day, just says, "Hey, you know what, guys, I got to go." Of course, we know there was a whole bunch of NCAA situations surrounding that, but it was still a big surprise. I do expect some surprises this offseason, especially as you look around the sport and you see some of these coaches, they're getting up there. And with COVID going on, you might have a lot of these people maybe making decisions where they want to spend more time with family, and we could see some changes there. I mean, a lot can happen between now and August.
So do you see?
I
I know it's an
completely agree.
NFL topic, but do you see Urban Meyer coming out of retirement going to Jacksonville?
I hope he doesn't. I've been hearing that. I would like to see Urban Meyer. Honestly, my hope was to see Urban Meyer end up at Texas. It would have annoyed the heck out of me. I would have started to root for him to win a national championship there, just to see if he's got that Midas touch, and if he could do it at Florida after all those years of falling further and further, and then he could go to Ohio State and immediately resurrect them. He is, of course, the reason that Utah is in the Pac-12. I would have liked to seen if he could pull it off with another blue blood in college football. As for the NFL, I don't understand the attractiveness of those jobs outside of that big paycheck, because it is a huge step up in many cases, and you do not have to recruit, which is something a lot of these coaches get very tired of. But Urban Meyer, I would hope
Right.
he would stay out. Of course, if he went there, it could be interesting. But we've seen with Bobby Petrino and Nick Saban, Pete Carroll to a smaller extent, it doesn't always translate to the NFL.
Yeah, I think Steve Spurrier learned real quick.
Right,
The NFL is not easy.
Yeah.
Have you heard anything about?
Speaking of that, I also saw where Ryan Day was option B if Urban does not come. That's surprising to me.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what you got to worry about now is you have to hope that it's not Ryan Day if you're a Cincinnati Bearcats fan, because there are people who certainly would want Luke Fickell, now that he's gotten a little bit more experience under his belt, to maybe get that shot. And it feels like as loyal as Luke Fickell is to the state of Ohio, that might be the one job that he would be guaranteed to take were he given the opportunity. But outside of that, I see Luke Fickell staying put. So I'm kind of hoping Ryan Day does too.
Have you heard anything? What's the latest on the Boise State opening? Like, I know there's Kellen Moore out there with the offense coordinator with the Cowboys. And what's the latest on that?
Well, they did just hire their new AD yesterday, and so they got that hammered out. And as you mentioned, they got the head coach situation to replace Brian Harsin, and they did go after Kellen Moore, who's been having an abundance of success on the coaching side after transitioning from being a backup in the NFL, doing a great job with Dallas Cowboys. But it looks like he has opted to stay in Dallas there on the coaching staff because, I mean, I guess Jerry Jones, it goes without saying, has a lot more money than the Boise State administration.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Dog, I was hoping I'd see Tony Romo run this offense and the Cowboys being a Tony Pollard fan, but But what's the maybe top 5 road trips that you might want to look forward to, since you're gonna be covering a little bit more college football in this upcoming season in the fall?
Top 5 road trips. One will actually be an AAC game. I'm going to be doing Cincinnati at Notre Dame. It's going to be my first trip to South Bend. The only trip that I previously did for the state of Indiana was at the Indiana Hoosiers, and it was not that exciting. My wife actually had done a game at Notre Dame a couple of years back, and she said, "You got to go do it. You got to go do Notre Dame whenever you get the opportunity." So I'm looking forward to that this year. I'm also looking forward to pretty much anything. It's anytime you get to see something new and hit new places. And I know that's pretty much going to be a lot of new in 2021. I'm kind of excited about all of it, but I have to say top 5 off the top of my head, the Rose Bowl for covering the Pac-12, which thank goodness it's got a cool stadium, because I'm sure the game won't be that exciting. Notre Dame at number 1, Rose Bowl at number 2, and then I'm going to have to round out the rest of the top 5, anything in Florida or Texas, because it's cold right now, and all I can think about is that.
Yeah, very true. Very true. We just want to say thank you very much for giving us roughly an hour of your time to just pick your brain, talk a little sports with you. I know for myself, I thoroughly enjoyed having you on today, and we would like to have you back on at a later point in time if everything works out.
Gentlemen, my pleasure. And, thanks again for reaching out. Thanks for having me on. Happy New Year to you both and to your audience and everybody there in Memphis, man. Always great talking about the Tigers.
Appreciate it, Austin.
Take care.
Thank you guys for watching. Thank you, everybody on Facebook, YouTube, and our